the human soul growing weaker, or is it that people simply can't stand suffering the way they used to?
Welcome back to my dark corner of this sick world.
If the devil has one great power on earth, it's the power to persuade men and women to do what they secretly want to do.
Like subscribing to our channel. Straight-to-video horror Stitches opens with some satanic sewing. Sort of expect hell to have a sweatshop, but there you go. What's he making? And so the demon heads to Earth in the guise of Mrs. Albright and checks into a lodging house.
I have many friends in Boston.
Great story. But she's just fitting in a house where everyone tells similarly great stories.
I went to a gypsy once. She said I'd get rich, but I didn't.
In a similarly mannered and stilted fashion, 'cause this is the past. Although, what area of the past, I have no idea.
Oh, and our bachelors. This is our young Mr. Reynolds.
I also don't know why. Given the difficulty they are having conveying that this is 100 years ago and not the Batley Townswomen's Guild's production of The Importance of Being Earnest, why didn't they just set it in the present?
Well, that is quite a question.
Makes no difference to the plot, and it would be more convincing. Anyway, Mrs. Albright meets the other guests.
What's your opinion on the subject of the devil?
Nothing helps a newcomer settle in like religious debate.
Well, the point I was trying to make is that if God has miracles, then Satan must too, mustn't he?
Why? In her room, Mrs. Albright unpacks her faceless paper dolls and her photo album. Wow, those are some bad memories. Before summoning a demonic ball of screwed up paper who spies on the other guests, like Mr. Reynolds.
Okay, now remember, no amount of belief makes a fact.
Who is still learning his lines.
What would you give?
Mrs. Albright takes advantage of his spiritual curiosity.
What would you give to know? That there is a God, a devil, a life beyond this one?
I can guess where this is going.
Tonight is just between us.
Wow, I guessed wrong.
Mr. Reynolds, would you help me unbutton the back of my dress, please?
I'll make you see God. But when Reynolds goes to help her...
What the?
Unlace the stitches, would you please?
I guess it would be rude to say, why is your skin laced up at the back? But I feel some reaction is called for.
You know what I am, don't you?
Wait, she has the same voice when she's a demon? And now... I like the idea of sewing souls, but is it accurate? Over to Dark Corner's needlework advisor. Cameraman's mum, can you use a sewing machine to extract the souls of unwitting mortals?
I know I do.
So, that's Mrs. Albright's plan. Tricking people into willingly gifting their souls using every trick in the book. Like changing shape. I now have questions about the skin suit. Now disguised as Miss Lester, the demon seduces the married Mr. Delaney.
Come to my room. I'll let you me.
Ah, the subtle dance of seduction. Now Delaney goes to see the real Miss Lester. Should I wake her? Nah, she was pretty clear. And she acts accordingly. Stop! Mrs. Albright is there to help.
She's flirted with me ever since she got here. She invited me, she gave me the key, and then she shot me because she's insane.
Boy, you're pretty talkative for someone bleeding out through his stomach. He does eventually remember to be in pain.
Oh. Now, Miss Lester.
Naturally, Delaney is willing to give up his soul in return for not dying. But what about Miss Lester?
Get undressed.
Another shapeshift into Mrs. Delaney, and Miss Lester gives up her soul in return for the love of a woman.
This is what you want, isn't it?
Then shapeshift into Mr. Delaney to trick the real Mrs. Delaney.
And you are gonna have the husband that you deserve.
I am? Who? She's followed by the landlady, so now more than half the house are gone.
Mrs. Albright won't be murdering us in our beds.
But still being intermittently played by the demon.
I hope you're right.
You know that Tommy Cooper sketch with the hats where he plays all the characters?
The lot jumped the soldier and said, "This ain't no time to fight." "You're right," said the sailor. And the banker said, "Well, all right."
That's what this is increasingly reminding me of. Anyway, Sam is suspicious.
I think there's something ungodly going on in this house.
That's always my first go-to. He tries to leave with servant Catherine.
Catherine, this is the work of the devil.
I've been saying it for years. Finally, I'm right.
And I believe the devil is in this house tonight. Or some servant of the devil.
I haven't got all the details ironed out. Mrs. Albright now explains.
My master sets me a challenge. Can I win the souls of everyone in a house?
It must be boring in hell.
Of course, almost always, somebody catches on.
Really? Someone almost always says, you know what? I bet the devil's behind this.
Perhaps you could make some sense out of it all for me.
The biggest problem with this film is there's nothing to follow and no tension. Mrs. Albright is there to take their souls, and she does.
Well, surely you didn't expect something civilized from me, did you, Sam?
But it's also conceptually flawed. Mrs. Albright, for the most part, is not tempting them into sin. All they have to do is say, "Oh, I'd give anything for a cup of cocoa." That's enough to give up their soul, making it very easy for her.
I suppose you might be right.
Sam actually sacrifices himself to try and save Catherine.
I'll make a trade. My soul for hers.
That ought to keep him out of hell, not put him in. I suppose I like the stitched dolls as an image, but it's amazing how a good image can go bad if you use it wrong. Oh dear. You know what? I'll just leave it there with the screaming dolls.
We're the only ones left.
Thanks for watching. You don't have to sell your souls to get a copy of my books. Just pick one up on Amazon. There's a link in the description below. Who are your favourite cinematic demons? Let us know in the comments below.
I'll say goodnight.